The UFC is the world's largest mixed martial arts league in the world. Now, in this, a fighter uses a combination of different martial arts like karate, jiu-jitsu, boxing, and wrestling to defeat their opponent in a cage match. And now a person wins their match by either knocking their opponent out or submitting them through a tap out. And now with the UFC being a very violent sport, people are wondering, is this something that Christians should watch and can they participate in it? Well, in this short video, I want to make a case that Christians can watch and participate in the UFC to the glory of God. So in order to say that something glorifies God, there must be something inherently good about it. And what is that about the UFC? Well, the UFC mixed martial arts, what it is glorying in the strength and resilience of manhood. So I have an assumption behind all this. I'm saying that God has created men and women. He's created them for a purpose, and their purpose is distinct. Women are more nurturing, and they're loving, and they're gentle, whereas men are created stronger with strength to protect and provide. And so in Proverbs 20, here's what the author says. He says, "The glory of young men is their strength, gray hair, the splendor of the old." When you couple that with 1 Corinthians 11, which says that a woman's long hair is her glory, you have three different glories for three different groups of people. So women, long hair, what's that talking about? Beauty is their glory that God has given them. Old hair for men, what's that saying? Wisdom with age for the elderly. And young men, their glory is their strength. So this is a gift from God that He has given us, men. And when we cultivate it and practice it and train our bodies, we are glorying in the strength that God has given us. So combat training is virtuous in and of itself when it is employed to protect self and others. And so a person who is untrained in combat, they're going to have to rely on lethal force far more often than a person who is trained in combat. And so my case is that it is far better to put somebody to sleep in a chokehold or to knock them out rather than to use lethal force. So if you are not trained as a man in combat training, you're going to have to rely on that knife or that gun more often if you're going to protect yourself and protect others. But if you are trained in combat, you'll have to rely on that in less situations, which is inherently good. There's another passage I want to highlight that comes from the book of Psalms. This is from Psalms 144. Now, this is written by King David. King David was called a man after God's own heart. He was a king chosen by God. He was a warrior. He was a man who trained in battle. And this is what he says. "Blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle." Now this verse is huge. I've actually seen this tattooed on one of the UFC fighters because, for a Christian understanding of mixed martial arts, you need to come here because this verse carries a lot of implications. So first off, there are times where battle is spiritualized in the New Testament and in the Old Testament. Where it talks about, we put on the armor of God and we fight spiritual battles, but this is not what David's talking about here. He's talking about real life battles. He's saying, I'm praising God that you have made me strong. I'm praising you that you prepared me for battle. I'm praising you that you have trained my hands for war. So what we get from this is that we can praise God and glorify God for making us strong. We can praise God for making us warriors. We can praise God for preparing us for combat training and for being successful in it. That's key. If you look at 1 Corinthians 10:31, which is one of my favorite verses in the Bible, it talks about how even doing the most menial tasks, such as eating and drinking, we can do that to the glory of God. That means that there's nothing that we can't do to the glory of God, providing that it's not sinful. So if it's something that's like, there's no redemptive value, you can't like commit adultery to the glory of God, but if there is some redemptive aspect to it, if it is morally, if it's a neutral tool, or if there's something inherently good about it, you can do it in such a way as to glorify God. Psalms 144 tells us so. Now you might be saying, okay, Jeremy, King David was fighting real battles against real enemies. I mean, this is the UFC. This is for entertainment only. I mean, this is a totally different situation. And you have a point to a degree, but here's the fact, is that no one enters a real life battle without first being trained. I mean, no one. You need to train for combat to get ready for real life situations. So you're not going to be any good to your country or to the people around you to protect them if you are not first trained. And so the UFC is training grounds for real life combat. And don't forget the goodness of combat. The goal in combat is to protect life. You know, we live in a sinful, broken world with real enemies, and it is virtuous when people use their strength, when men use their strength to protect the innocent, to protect the people around them. That is virtuous. So God has designed men to be protectors and providers, and that means that there's going to be certain traits that when we cultivate them, that is inherently good. And so a man, when he watches the UFC, he learns different fighting techniques, and he might get inspired to get fit and to care for his body, and he might be inspired to persevere through adversity and trials. There's many good things that watching the UFC can spur men on towards, and that's what it does for me. Because God has given strength to men, it's only natural that men are going to want to cultivate that strength and test that strength against other men. And that is okay. That is natural. That is good. And so when we do that, when we enter combat sports, when we train in MMA or we watch it, we're just doing what is natural, and we can do this in a way that honors and glorifies God. Now, just because that there are praiseworthy elements of the UFC, that doesn't mean that it's without fault. I do think there are some lamentable aspects to it, and I just want to go over them. Now, some men aren't going to care about this, but me coming from a Christian worldview, wanting to honor and glorify God, that means I use the Bible as the standard of morality. Morality is not arbitrary, but it's rooted in the nature and the character of God. And therefore, I do have some critiques of the UFC. For example, the ring girls are sexualized and immodest, and you know what? I wish they weren't a part of it. So personally, when I watch UFC matches and I see the ring girls, I actually just turn my head and I don't stare at them. I'm a married man, so I only want to look at my wife that way. Now, my second critique of the UFC is that they have women in combat. Now, it was men only until 2013, but then they introduced women into the UFC. Now, that still makes up a small percentage. There's usually only like 1 or maybe 2 women matches on there. There's still far more men who are competing in it. But I do think it's lamentable that women are engaging in combat. Now, let me clarify first, because I do think it's not that women can't participate in MMA. In a broken, sinful world where women are always under, the potential for attackers, to be raped or to be robbed or hurt, it is good for women to learn self-defense. So I don't want to just say that, women can't learn MMA. But my point is that when we act as if there's no difference between men and women, when we say that, it's a woman's job to protect just as much as a man, or that, women can go join the army just like a man. No, we got to say that there's a creational difference here. Women are made to be protected. Men are made to be protectors. This is not just my opinion either, although that's bears witness in nature, the fact that women have smaller frames and guys are made stronger. You also see this in 1 Peter 3:7, which says, "Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, and treat them with respect as the weaker partner, and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life. So Peter is saying that a woman is the weaker vessel. Now that's not meant to degrade women, it's just talking about a natural fact. They are the weaker ones and they need protection. Children are also weaker, and that's why we as parents protect our children. It's not like, it's not denigrating someone to say that they need protection. But we as men are the ones who are to engage in combat. We're the ones that are to lose our lives potentially to protect others. We're the ones that it's a glory when we train in combat to protect. It is not a glory when we put our women out on the battlefield, and it's not a glory when we put women into cages to fight one another. So practically, I skip every single women's match. And no, not everyone is going to share that same conviction, but that is a deeply held one of mine. And my final critique of the UFC is that even though that most of the fighters are professionals and are good guys, after their match they'll go hug their opponent and give them some praise, and it's all good afterwards, that there are some who actually want to use the cage as a way to exact revenge on people. They want to inflict as much pain and as hurt. I've heard some fighters talking about wanting to disable people. That's completely uncalled for. Revenge is not a good godly trait. It is good when we train our bodies and we get strong and we test each other, but our goal is not to disable and to seriously injure one another. The goal in a UFC match is to win the match and not to permanently hurt the other person. So when that motivation is articulated by a fighter, I'm not cheering for it. So is it good for Christians to watch the UFC and to even participate in mixed martial arts? Absolutely. You can do so as a man to cultivate your strength and to train yourself in combat so you can both protect yourself as well as the weak and the vulnerable. And in that way, when you do so, you can give praise to God, knowing that it is He that has trained your hands for battle. As a postscript, Pastor Master Durbin, who played the Ninja Turtles and Mortal Kombat characters, he has 5 black belts, and he taught the men of his church some basic self-defense and mixed martial arts. So you can click on that video to watch it in the comments. And also, if you subscribe to this channel, I'm going to be highlighting various UFC fighters and their faith.